Hey guys, we have moved on to Unit 2. Unit 2 is the Industrial Revolution. But we have to have a little introduction to the Industrial Revolution, and that is the Agricultural Revolution. So, I want you to imagine, think about being back in the year 1750. Now, I know that to your 16, 17-year-old mind, 1750 sounds like a long time ago. But let's talk about the entire history of the Earth. So the Earth began when? 4.5 billion years ago. Humans showed up 315,000 years ago. Homo sapiens, that's us. Homo sapiens, hopefully you've heard that word in science class. Homo sapiens, humans, looked just like you and me, have been around 315,000 years. Farming began about 10,000 years ago. Now, all the way from 10,000 years ago until only about 250 years ago, farming stayed the same. Farming stayed the exact same from 10,000 years ago all the way to 250 years ago. And pretty much what a farm was some guy walked out, had some seeds in his hand, and threw them out on the ground and hoped they would grow. That was it. Any kind of tools that he had were tools that he had made himself in his own house. Any food that he ate was food that he had grown. Any clothes that he had were clothes that he and his wife had made. Everything was done in their house, and it was very, very, very simple. But things were about to change. The Dutch made huge improvements to farming. The Dutch, these are people that live in the Netherlands. Just like I'm from America, I'm American. You're maybe from Kazakhstan and you're Kazakh. Well, the people that are from the Netherlands are called Dutch. So the Dutch people did things like this crazy thing. They reclaimed land from the sea. How did they do that, Mrs. Gibbons? They built these walls called dikes. Like right through the water, they built a wall. And they pushed the water back onto the other side of the wall and claimed that land for themselves. And they used that land as farms. And the land was really rich. The Dutch also made some advancements in crop rotation. I'm going to give you a quick, tiny little lesson on crop rotations so you understand what it is. Let's say this is my farm, and I break my farm up into areas, and I grow tomatoes, let's say squash, and I don't know, carrots. So carrots take a certain kind of mineral from the ground, and squash takes a different mineral, and tomatoes take different minerals. And if I leave my tomatoes right here, year after year after year, eventually my tomatoes aren't going to grow anymore because all the minerals and vitamins and everything that tomatoes need, they've eaten them all from the ground. The same thing from the squash. If I grow my squash here, year after year after year, my crop is going to get worse and worse and worse every year until one year it's not going to grow anymore. So they do this thing called crop rotation. And that's where I leave one box empty. And the next year, I move everything. So the next year, I grow my tomatoes here and my squash here and my carrots here, and this one is empty. And then next year, I grow my squash here and my carrots here, and this one's empty, and I grow my tomatoes here. And the next year, so you understand, you move it around like this. It's called crop rotation. The Dutch also learned about fertilizer from their cattle's poop. What? You may know this already because it's 2020, and even if you've never farmed a day in your life, you might know that poop makes really good fertilizer. But 250 years ago, this was mind-blowing stuff. Nobody knew this. It was like really, really cool. The Dutch would come and they would put their cow's poop down on the ground, and then they would plant. And the plants grew better than they did when they grew them somewhere without their poop. They also made a seed drill. This was a big one. So how did I tell you that how plants were planted before? The guy just went out with a handful of seeds and he threw them around and he hoped they would grow. Well, now the seed drill is this tool that he would push. It looks kind of like this. The man is standing here and he pushes this, and here's the ground. He pushes it and seeds come out. He pushes it a little further and a seed comes out. He pushes a little further and a seed comes out. And so it drops the seeds in straight lines. And it made a big difference in farming. Like when you're driving, you probably don't drive. When your parents are driving down the road and you're sitting in the back seat and you look out and you see where someone's growing their crops, they're all planted in straight lines, right? That didn't happen before. They just threw their seeds out and hoped they would grow. So, made a really big difference. The dikes, the crop rotation, the fertilizer, the seed drill, these were all things that helped agriculture, that means farming, agriculture is farming, become better. Okay, so another thing that happened was during the agricultural revolution was rich landowners took more land for themselves and became even richer. So Mrs. Gibbons is not an artist, or well, I kind of am, but not for drawing. These are the nobles. This is some rich person's land. And out here are peasants. Peasants don't have anything. They're so poor. They can just barely grow enough food to keep their kids alive. They have nothing. They're lucky if they have a tiny shack with a roof over their heads. But they just kind of farmed the land that was outside of the rich people's land. And there might be more rich people over here with their land. And the peasants just kind of lived in the free land. Well, what happened during the agricultural revolution was the rich people started making their land bigger. Oops. The rich people made their land bigger. So eventually, they made their land bigger and bigger and bigger. And whoa, what's happening to that peasant? The peasant just lost their land. What are they supposed to do? And the government supported them. The government was totally cool with it and just let the rich people keep claiming more and more land for themselves. But now the peasants had nothing. They already had almost nothing, and now they have really nothing. And so they went to the cities. They were desperate, they were poor, they were hungry, they didn't have anywhere to even grow food to feed their kids, so they went to the cities. Now, they're in the cities, and they don't have anything. They're just kind of hanging out on the streets in the city, not having anything to do. But while the poor were getting poorer, the rich were getting richer. The rich people are getting richer and richer and richer. So the economy of the nation, and now, sorry, I forgot to mention, we're pretty much only talking about Britain right now. We're in Britain. And the rich are getting richer and richer and richer, which is helping the economy grow. The poor are getting poorer, but the rich are getting richer, and everyone cares about the rich people. So there's this huge population growth because the farming is better. Farming is better with more food. You have less famine because now they've learned how to farm better. And when you have less famine, it means you have more food, which means you have less starvation. So people are doing all right. Let's see, farming is better. They've also got better personal hygiene. People are actually bathing themselves a little bit more often. And better sanitation. People have learned now that they shouldn't just throw their pee and poop out the window anywhere on the road. They've learned that their garbage shouldn't just go anywhere. They're not exactly sure why yet. Science hasn't gotten there yet. People don't really understand why it should be clean, but they have at least learned that when the environment around them is cleaner, that they stay healthier. So there's this amazing boom in farming, which makes the population get bigger because people are living longer. There's also a thing called the energy revolution, which I could teach for a month on, but the really important thing is people learned how to use coal to their advantage. They used coal to make steam engines. And steam engines were amazing. Steam engines could power trains. Steam engines could power ships. Steam engines could power machinery. Like before people realized how to harvest the energy from coal, there wasn't even a such thing as trains. There was no such thing. How could anyone even imagine a train if there was nothing to power it with? But they learned how to use coal to make steam engines. And once they could learn how to power an engine, people went crazy with, well, what can we use this engine for? And they powered great big ships, and they powered big machines, and they powered trains. They also learned how to smelt iron. What does smelt mean, Mrs. Gibbons? Well, iron is a metal. Do you know where metals come from? And I'm asking that as an honest question. Do you know where metal comes from? Metal mostly comes from rocks. You can go outside. I encourage you to go outside and just pick up a rock. Inside that rock is metal. But how do you get the metal out? You have to get that rock so hot that it turns to liquid, which is possible. You should have learned about this in science class. You can get a rock so hot that it melts and it turns into liquid. And when it turns into liquid, you can separate the parts. And if you pull out the parts that will turn into metal, so you pull it out and you put all the metal parts into one part, into one area, and then when it cools off, it turns into metal. And that's when you've seen like blacksmiths hammering, because when it's still hot, you can mold it into the shape that you want. And people have known this for a really, really long time. We have like the Bronze Age and the Copper Age of like people using metals from a very, very long time. But this is the time that they learned how to make iron really, really strong. Like strong enough to make machines with, strong enough to make bridges that people still drive over today. They learned how to do all this stuff. So with our agricultural revolution and our energy revolution and learning how to make really, really strong iron, all of this leads into the Industrial Revolution. And that's where my next video will take us.